Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And welcome to our 5th Zoom lecture of the current lecture season. Thanks for attending. Please turn off your microphones now if they're on. I see most of them are off. That's good. And save your questions and comments, please, until the end of tonight's lecture. Tonight marks the first time Almont Lectures is presenting an international speaker, Johanna Filp-Hanke, an emeritus professor at Sonoma State University in California, just above San Francisco. It's my great pleasure to introduce Johanna to you. I first met Johanna about 55 years ago when she arrived at UBC from her native Chile to study psychology. As the years went by, Johanna received a PhD in psychology at Germany's Freiburg University and was awarded a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship to continue her work. Johanna spent about half of her 43-year career working at the Center for Research and Development in Education in Santiago, also known as CIDE, a nonprofit progressive think tank conducting research and developing programs to improve the quality of early education in poor communities. In 1996, she joined the faculty of early childhood studies at Sonoma State University, preparing immigrants and first-generation college students to work with young children and families. Tonight, she's going to talk about some of her work over the years and its implications under a title, Too Many Children and Families Left Behind. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you so much. This is very exciting. Preparing the talk was fun because it was going back, reading stuff that I had written and thinking about my work. So it was very nice. Well, this is also a special occasion for me because Canada has a really special place in my heart. As Warren said, I arrived there in 1968 at the tender age of 21, and I came from a very sheltered, conservative, authoritarian family, and I was plunged into Vancouver, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, Vietnam protest marches, gay movement, flower children, first joint, hash brownies, you name it. So it was an amazing chaos, and it really opened my eyes to the world at large, and also in a way to myself. In a way, I feel that Canada is sort of my second birthplace, and I just have very, very fond feelings for Canada. So I am very happy that I can give my first talk after retiring here with the Almonte lectures. In this talk, I would like to share with you some of the work that I did advocating for children and families who live in poverty and in marginal areas. I will mostly focus on the work I did in Chile during the 1970s, which happened to coincide with the military dictatorship, which were very tough years. So what I want to do is first, I want to present some research that explains why it is so crucial to support children and families, particularly during the first 3 years of life, and mostly why we need to support children who grow up in poverty, in stressful situations. So, and then I will describe the program that we developed with a team at CIDE, where we supported families in rural areas to support the development of their children. And that project was called Proyecto Padres e Hijos. So let me move to let me share my PowerPoint with you. Here it is. Share. And here we are. So the first I want to tell you why advocating for children in poor communities is so close to my heart. Um, I'm motivated by my personal history and also by what research tells us about the impact of poverty on children's development. My parents emigrated to Chile when I was 2 years old. There is a lot of poverty in Chile now, but then it was abject poverty. So families would come to our doors every day with their children begging for food. And I can remember being 4 or 5 years old and just being heartbroken by seeing the children on the other side of the fence, barefoot, hungry, handing a little can so that we would put some soup in there. And it just really broke my heart. So just to give you an example, rainy days have a very mixed feeling for me because when I was little and it rained and I was at night in bed, nice and warm, I would think of the children that were outside barefoot, freezing, and I just couldn't sleep. It was too painful. And I always wondered how I could help them. And this is just a kind of a cute, well, an interesting note. At that, I was about 6, an avid reader, so I read about Albert Schweitzer's life. So I thought that when I grow up, I was going to go and work with Albert Schweitzer in Africa and help save children. I have to confess that around the age of 12, I changed my vocation and I thought that being a stewardess, which they were called at that time, would be really cool because they had a cool uniform. Anyway, I left that vocation too and I ended up studying psychology. So, so let me just, but then also the other part that motivates my work is what research tells us about how important the first 3 years of lives of the children are, and the importance of the quality of the human interactions and of the environment. So for some of you, this might be a repetition, but we know that in the first 3 years of life, the brain of the child grows so that it reaches 80% of its adult size. Here we can see that the sensory pathways are formed during the first year of life. Language also peaks at first year of life in terms of brain paths, and the higher cognitive functions usually develop also, the basis for them develops by the age 2 or 3. So if the right experiences don't occur during these years, you will have children who will have considerable delays in their emotional, intellectual, and social development. Um, so the interesting thing is that, as you know, the brain develops through making new connections between synapses. And you see here we have the brain of a newborn, and by the time the child is 2 years old, the number of connections in the brain is pretty similar to an adult. Now, why is it so important to have positive human interactions and a positive environment? Because these connections are formed through the experiences with the outside world. So basically, what children need is sensory stimulation, motor activity, healthy emotional interactions. All of these shape the brain. They help the brain to make new connections. And human interactions are crucial. I always think of that when people put their children in front of the television. Research actually shows that if your child only watches television, they will not learn language. The learned language can be reinforced, but what you need is something that's called serve and return. So what the child needs is, it shows an interest towards a human being, the child receives an adequate response, and then the neural connections are formed that then form the basis for these types of behaviors. So, for example, a simple act such as paying attention to a child has an impact on the child's well-being and development. Child development is negatively impacted by poverty, toxic situations, such as, for example, children and families with domestic violence, abuse, and neglect. And unfortunately, this is quite rampant in many families who struggle with extreme stress. So, for example, in the United States, we have that the poverty rate is nearly 1.5 times higher for children than for adults. And adults the age 18 to 64, and it's 2 times higher than that of adults of 65 and older. So children are left behind, and this is what prompted me to come up with the title of my talk. So the other sad thing is that child poverty is quite rampant in rich countries. So here we have statistics from UNICEF that shows the percentage of children living in households with income below 60% of the national median income in 2008, 2014, and 2018, which are these different points here. We can see that in the United States, poverty rate is of 30%. So United States is supposed to be the most powerful country, and it's a tragedy. It's terrible that we have 30% of the children living in poverty. If we think of today with the pandemic, we see that, oops, okay, that's fine. So the poverty impacts children. Children who grow up in poverty, we have higher levels of emotional and behavioral difficulties. We have higher rates of depression. We have higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease later in life, higher infant mortality rate, and decreased educational success. And nowadays, with the pandemic, this situation has become even worse. We find that the health systems are unable to serve the children. The nutrition programs are disrupted. Most children who grow up in very poor areas get breakfast and lunch at school, so now they're not getting anything. The education is disrupted. Little children cannot do online learning. Little children need to play. They need to be active in their learning. And what is even sadder is that there are increased risks of child exploitation, violence, and abuse, because in many cases, these are discovered in schools and in the preschool, and so now children don't have that protection. So the situation has become worse. Something else that impacts children's development is toxic stress. So by toxic stress, we mean stress that is intense and ongoing. Stress is part of life, and a healthy amount of stress is actually beneficial for our development as children and as adults as well. But if you have toxic stress and prolonged exposure to stress hormones, what has been found is that the toxic stress decreases the size and impairs the functions of the region of the brain responsible for learning, memory, and executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So you actually find that these areas of the brain shrink because of the impact of the stress hormones. They actually act like poison on the child's brain. As I mentioned, the need for human interaction is crucial for children's development of positive human interaction, and lack of attention and a lack of positive human response creates stress for children. I want to share a very brief video. It's a 2-minute video that shows what happens to children when they are not getting the human attention that they need.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother is trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So this is a little bit of information from research that shows us how critical it is that we provide positive physical, emotional, social, human experiences for young children. However, many government, the one in the United States included, think that this is too much money, too expensive. However, James Heckman, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, did a study about the return of preschool programs, and he found that Perry Preschool Program, which is a very high quality preschool program, shows a 7 to 10% per year return on the investment. And this is based on increased school and career achievement, as well as reduced costs in remedial education, health, and the criminal justice expenditures. So money that is spent in the first 3 years of a life of a child and the family is good for everybody. It brings benefit for all of us. Heckman also found that the highest rate of return comes when we provide this support during the first 3 years of life. So now I would like to tell you about the Proyecto Padres Hijos that we developed at CIDE with a very nice, with a wonderful team of people. And we started right at the beginning of the military dictatorship, which was quite traumatic. However, we also were able to provide shelter for the families because we actually worked under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, which at that time was very important in protecting human rights during the dictatorship. So Chile is a country of contrasts. On the one hand, we have high rises, billionaires. On the other hand, we have extreme poverty. So the income inequality is very large in Chile. And this actually was what prompted the massive social protest movements that happened about 2 years ago. And in the 1970s, these inequalities were even larger. So the Proyecto Padres e Hijos, we started out in rural areas because we wanted to support the families in helping their children develop and in seeing the needs of their children. Basically, we had weekly meetings with the families, and then they worked with their children during the week. So let me briefly tell you what were some of the influences. In the Northern Hemisphere, we had the beginnings of Head Start. And in Chile, during 1972, we had a socialist government, and that socialist government promoted equality, support in poor areas. So when we started, it was very supported. Then in 1973 came the military coup, and the program was actually considered a threat. So much so that when we presented a talk about the program at a conference, the military police came in and said that all the people from CIDE had to leave the room, which was a terrifying experience. Luckily, we were not detained. But then another influence, it comes from Jean Piaget, who understood that children need play in order to develop. So this idea that children are going to do worksheets and fill out, color figures goes counter to what children really need in order to develop, and what they need is play. Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory was also behind our work, because Bronfenbrenner saw that a child develops within a larger context. So you have the family, the neighborhood, the political system. So you can't just work with the family and with the child individually. And then lastly, because we were working with parents, we gave a lot of thought about how are we going to work with parents? What is going to be our theoretical framework about how are we going to relate to the parents? Particularly given that we came from an urban area, privileged, educated group, and we were working with families in poor rural areas. And we tried to follow Paulo Freire's ideas. He wrote a book that is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He actually he is Brazilian, and he is an educator and a philosopher. And he worked in Chile, helping with the education of families in rural areas. And he was shocked by how these educators went out to rural areas and talked to peasants as though the rural people, as though they were dumb, as though they knew nothing, and treated them basically like children. So he really became aware of the power issues involved in educational situations, particularly when we are relating to people who come from an oppressed situation, who are not privileged. So we tried to really see how could we translate those ideas into practice. Let me tell you a little bit about Paulo Freire. He's considered a radical democratic humanist. He says that education is a search process carried out by a subject, a human being. Human beings must be subjects of their own education. They cannot be objects of it. And so according to this idea, nobody educates anybody. Nonetheless, nobody can search an individual situation. the search has to take place with other human beings who also seek to be more. So the whole idea is, the focus is not so much on the content, but on the relationship that we establish with the people we work with. The content is also important, but in the content, we have to start from the point of view that we all come to a situation with background knowledge. We all have funds of knowledge. And Paulo Freire rejected the idea of banking education. He said that most educational programs consider people as an empty bank account, and you just deposit knowledge in that bank account. And that also creates a power differential, because somebody has the knowledge and somebody doesn't have it. And so we are going to fill the person with this knowledge that's actually chosen by me. I think that you need to know this. So this required, we had many, many meetings with our team, because the ideas seemed wonderful, inspiring when we read about them, but then how do we translate that? How do we actually do this in our practice? So Freire also said that education has to be a liberation process. And he says it's an ongoing process. And he does talk about love. I know that that's kind of strange. You know, we in academic circles, talking about love is, strange. But he says that love is central, because it gives us the commitment, the care, and the respect in our relationship with others. And the other part of love that is important is that we need to love what we teach. There has to be that emotional connection. Other virtues that Paulo Freire also talks about are humility, or the courage to say, I don't know. And this was very central in our work, because I have to confess, we came in with the idea, I know. And this is what Piaget said, you have to play with your children, or, I mean, even though we think that that's important, parents said, no, we want you to teach our children how to read, So how do you come to an agreement about, okay, what do the parents want for the children, and what do we think that the children need? And we had to learn to say, I don't know. And I find that this is a wonderful experience. And in these crazy moments, I also have kind of ended up saying, I don't know. And it's just kind of watching, trying to understand. But this, I don't know, was very important in our relationship with the families in rural areas. Openness is another quality that Paulo Freire discussed. He says we have to be open to other people's ideas, to other people's background knowledge, their beliefs, their opinions. So this was something else that we had to practice. And in our weekly meetings with our team, we often shared how much we struggled to say, I don't know, and be open to the family's background knowledge. Paulo Freire also talked about hope. When you work with families in very poor areas, he says that without a minimum hope, we cannot so much start a struggle. So we need that hope, but without struggle, hope as an ontological need dissipates, loses its bearings, and turns into hopelessness. Hence the need for a kind of education in hope. For me, Paulo Freire, he's very moving, and he's not easy to read because he's a philosopher and an epistemologist, so I've had to read his work many times. But he really I think that work set the groundwork for how I approached education later on, also when I taught my college students. So Paulo Freire says that all of this is a long process, and we did experience that in our team. In our weekly meetings, we talked about what was happening to us, and so some of the things that we talked about is really being sensitized to power issues in the learning relationship, being sensitized to our own prejudice, and learning to listen. So with the power issues, it's very interesting because when I had the meetings with the mothers in rural areas, I came in, you have your background knowledge, nobody is a learner, nobody's a teacher, everybody is a learner, everybody's a teacher, which sounds really nice. However, in practice, there were two things happening. For me, it was hard to let go of my power. I got my MA at University of British Columbia, I worked hard. I know this stuff. So I had to let go of that power. And the other part is that the mothers didn't want me to let go of the power. They said, okay, you're cheating us because you know what we have to do and you don't want to tell us. So we had many conversations where the idea was that the mothers, I'd say, okay, well, but what do you know that works for your child? What do you think your child needs? And many times they knew it, but they didn't trust their own knowledge. So a lot of the work had to do in helping them trust what they knew. Becoming aware of our own prejudice was a painful process, and I have to confess that I was very humbled by discovering my own prejudices. Just to give you a small example, once I was talking to a mother in the rural community, and afterwards one of my colleagues said to me, "Why are you yelling at her?" I was yelling at her. Señora María, cuénteme, ¿cómo le fue a usted hoy día? And I was so embarrassed when I realized what I was doing. It's what we do when we think people are dumb or don't understand. And that's how I treated this mother after all the reading I had done about how I wanted to respect her and how I needed to respect her. So it was painful, but it was also very healthy and liberating to have that courage to see my own prejudices. Listening was central, and I am still learning to listen. I always remember that they say, most of the time when we listen, we are thinking about what we're going to reply. We don't listen trying to understand what the other person is telling us. So when we were working with the families, we focused on listening, having them talk and us talk a lot less. And in a way, these ideas also remind me of the conversations we are having now here at the university with regards to anti-racist conversations. What do we need to do being in a privileged group in order to open up these conversations? So these ideas are still relevant nowadays. So what happened to the mothers? So after a year of working together, we asked the mothers what the program meant to them. And one mother said, how can I say it? I arrived like a little thing and I'm leaving like a nice round teddy bear, all puffed up with my strength. I will now be able to speak up to tell the teacher at school to treat my child well. The next point about the language of power was very surprising and interesting for us. I remember one of the mothers said, okay, I now know that I have a lot of knowledge. Um, However, I want to learn how to talk to people in power because there are things that we need to change in our community. And I have seen that people who are in power talk differently. And we need to talk in that way so that the people will listen to us. And actually what we did then was we watched TV programs together. And so how do people in power talk? What's their body like? What is their tone of voice? What words do they use? And then we did some role playing. And then the mothers organized and they went to talk to the mayor because they were not picking up the trash in the community, and they got the trash to be picked up. That part just was wonderful. Another aspect was that mothers became more aware of the importance of attachment. And they said, I'm more relaxed with my children. I have changed because I have applied what I learned here. I didn't know what it means to share with him, to play with him. I now give a lot of importance to these moments. So this ties back to the little video that we watched about the importance of just paying attention. The other day I read something that I found very moving, and it said that attention is the most fundamental form of love. And I think that is so powerful, just being there for the other person. And this is something that the mothers realized, that just being with their child was important for them and for the child. There were also some changes with the use of physical punishment. One of the mothers said that she used to beat the children when they went and touched the fire, but she now explained to them why they shouldn't do that, and the children understood. And she said, the children understood. I did not have to beat them. I even was nicer to them. I hugged them, and the children said to me, you do love me. In terms of verbal interactions, the mother said, I learned to see my children, to know how they are, how they feel, to understand what happens to them. I now talk to them and they tell me what they feel and what they want. And I wonder whether the experience of being listened to and valued that we had in our group meetings also helped the mothers to translate this in their relationships with their children. So this is what I wanted to share about this experience with you, and I hope you have lots of comments, questions, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you so much, Johanna, for your wonderful presentation. The floor is now open, or the screen is the word. Do people have any comments or questions?
I do.
Yes.
Are there programs in place to educate municipal and provincial governments about the importance of getting to children before age 3 to support the families, say even here in Canada?
Canada has some non-governmental agencies that focus on the importance of, and I think it's similar to No Child Left Behind, but I think it's called Children First. Yeah, Canada has one, but you're right. We need to educate the public, and I am so happy about the findings with brain research, because finally people are listening to us. You know, like the language, of the Western world is, research. So, but that's why I said too many children left behind. Children cannot be advocates for themselves, and they are the weakest link, and people who work in the field of early childhood, we are also considered at the bottom of the totem pole. I can see that in the university. Your early childhood, like, oh, you just sit in a sandbox and play with the children. That's all you need to know. So we need, yes. And I think, I thought, well, maybe this would not be that important for you because what you have, your children are grown or you don't have children. But I think we need to be advocates for children, and particularly for children and families in poor areas. They don't have any power. What are they going to do? They're going to go on a strike. So, they tend to be invisible. That's why I'm so passionate about this work.
I am too. 30 years ago, I was part of a group in West Ottawa called Better Beginnings. And it was there were pediatricians and everything else like that. And they were saying well over 30 years ago that if we get to our children before age 3, they used to think it was age 5. They brought it back down to age 3, that potentially our penitentiaries in one generation would be empty.
Exactly.
But they are crawling and not addressing it because there's still so much child poverty and our jails are still full.
That is so true. And for example, the research on toxic stress has shown that stress hormones act like poison on the child's brain. And now there's also research, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, also ACEs, that shows that the higher the number of adverse child experiences you have in the first 3 years of life, the more your development is interrupted. And it interrupts the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with emotional understanding, with impulse control. And you're right. I mean, if you look at the young people who are in jail, they all have had, adverse early childhood experiences, all of them. So if we spend money supporting the families and the children early on, we can empty the jails. There are some interesting programs. There are home visiting programs with nurses. I think that's happening in Chicago, and it has had fabulous results. Well, there are the preschools from the Perry preschool program, High Scope. There are many programs, but people say it's too expensive. We don't have universal preschool in the United States. It's too expensive. And preschool teachers make minimum salary. So the turnover is tremendous. So there's very good point. Are child care centers a better resource than parental care? What are the parents' roles when children are in childhood daycare from an early age? That is a crucial question. Early on, we need to support the families and the children because children form a unit with their parent. And if the parent is not okay, the child will not be okay. However, we do need childcare as well. Women go out to work. There are men who are in charge of their children. So we need high quality childhood care, which means low teacher to child ratio, a focus on emotional development, a focus on play, and a focus on supporting the families and their role as parents. So right now, childcare is a necessity, and we need to focus on providing high quality care. But the support of parents is also crucial.
Are there
That's
other questions? Johanna. Johanna, is there enough time to tell? Oh, Barbara?
Oh.
Hi, Barb.
Hi, Johanna.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. With your work, how would you had mentioned parents putting kids in front of TV, which I don't assume necessarily is a, is not just a poverty thing, it's middle class as well. We see kids all the time, young kids all the time, out with their moms, but their moms are on their cell phones.
Right.
So do the signs that we see externally, are they going on in the homes, and what effects would you expect to see?
That is such an important question, and it is rampant in all families. I mean, if we think that the experience determines the brain connections the baby is going to make, the child is going to make brain connections that have to do with screeching noises, immediate gratification. There is no serve and return, absolutely no serve and return. So right now, even the school of the Association of Pediatricians in the United States say that children should not have more than 20 minutes of screen time a day, which is, but it's such a vicious circle because the parents are stressed out, and this is in all, socioeconomic groups. And the parents themselves are on social media. I see it. The child has an iPad in the supermarket, and the parent is on Facebook. And I just think that Facebook and all the social media is purposefully built to hook you. It hooks the parents. It hooks the children. And I once read that actually when you get a message on your phone, you get a shot of dopamine in your nervous system. So you're actually getting, addicted to dopamine and to the adrenaline. It is not good for children. It's not good for parents. Particularly if you think that the brain architecture depends on what's happening outside, on the kinds of interactions a child had. So, and I don't have the answer. It's just very, very scary what's going to happen to the children later on. They're not going to connect to other people. They're going to connect to an electronic device. There is a fascinating study that Alison Gopnik at the University of Washington did. She had, you probably know, I mean, you know this, but I find it fascinating. All babies recognize the same sounds of all languages up until 6 months. Starting 6 months, babies whose parents speak Chinese, they will no longer recognize sounds of the English language. We no longer recognize sounds of the Chinese language. So the connections that are not used are pruned away. And what Alison Gopnik did, she had children after 6 months of age have learned, like children who speak English, learn Chinese by just watching a TV screen with a very nice lady. And then another group learned Chinese by interacting with this lady. The children who watch TV, they were not able to recognize the Chinese sounds. Children who had the interaction with this very nice person, those brain connections were reestablished because you had the serve and return. So yeah, it's I don't know. I don't have the answer. It drives me crazy when I see. What do you think, Barb?
They were saying that because of the electronics. The biggest problem in classrooms today and our society is the lack of empathy, because there isn't the human interaction with facial disappointments when somebody's reached out and hurt. It's all through media, so they don't have the emotion.
That's exactly it. It is terrifying. Yeah, yeah. There are some wonderful questions here. I have a friend from Chile who came from Chile during the political situation, who would find this talk of great interest. I also would like to send it to my friend Anand, who runs a school in India, serving mostly poor children from the indigenous people in Tamil Nadu in the Western Ghats. Wow. Yes, well, the talk will be recorded. It is being recorded, and I can send the PowerPoints to Warren and to Mel and to Jan, and happy to share whatever is useful for you. Is there a difference today with children raised in childcare centers than when we were all stay-at-home moms? Such an important question. I ask myself that. I went back to work when my children were 3 months old. And I tell my children, don't do that. If you can, stay with your children until they're 3 years old. However, you can't always do that. Mothers have to work. And also, I would say during the first year of life, definitely, that's the most important relationship with the mother and the father, or the caregiver in the home. However, later on, children need other children to play, to interact. So, and if a mother has to work or wants to work, for some women, it's just they want to. Unfortunately, I'm from the generation we thought we could do it all, and you can't. But it's done. My kids actually say, "Come on, Mom, we turned out okay." So, but good quality childcare in the first year of life is okay, but children do get stressed out by the noise of the other children. There is something like overstimulation. So probably shorter periods if that's possible. But if not, if the mother has to work, high quality, caring educators who love the children, who pay attention to the child, who play with the child. There's a wonderful work done by Emmy Pickler and Magda Gerber. Magda Gerber wrote a wonderful book. It's called Dear Parents, Respect Your Child. And you can buy it. I'm not, there is a website called RIE, and they are the ones that are working with parents. And this idea that we need to respect children, even in things such as, may I pick you up? Would you like this? And children respond, they know, or they reach out to you. There are amazing now books about, how to treat children with love and respect. So the difference between staying with a mom and childcare is a complex question. I don't have exactly the answer, because sometimes moms are overwhelmed. They get stressed out because they have no contact with anybody else, and so they lash out at the children. So, but it is an important question to ask.
Other questions? One or two more. Barbara? Barbara, can you hear me? You have to unmute. We cannot hear you.
Okay, here we go. When you're talking about, children in the first 3 years of life. There are a lot of children who are through the pandemic who have been born or who were infants when it started. And those are the critical 3 years. And a lot of them haven't had a lot of interaction with other kids necessarily. So what do kids who are born during the pandemic or very young during the pandemic, like what do they need? Their 3 years have perhaps gone.
Wow, I'm so glad you bring up that topic. To start out with, children who were born during the pandemic have a hard time reading facial expressions because a lot of faces are covered.
Yeah.
So that is one big issue. We, and with my colleagues, that is the big question we are asking ourselves. And also you have the children at home, the parent working online, maybe a grandparent sick. The pandemic is having a very severe impact on children's well-being. They don't interact with other children. The parents really don't have the time to be with them. Child care services have been curtailed. So we don't know, but that's a very important question.
Would you expect that it would have an impact that is going to follow them throughout their lives?
I don't know. Like what we know about the impact of toxic stress in early ages is that you can provide positive experiences later on to heal those wounds. However, it takes a lot more time and effort. So let me just say, if as a child, it would take 10 minutes to soothe a child, but if that child has been subjected to prolonged toxic stress as a teenager, right now I've read some of the trauma-informed care, and it takes a year or 2 years because children are not trusting. Their attachment and their ability to trust other people has been harmed. So it takes a long process of relearning to it's scary.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions.
I have a question, but I want to make sure that people in the audience here have had their say. Okay, let me ask my question. Do you remember the time when you were doing research on children having boxes?
Yeah.
Could you make a short story out of that and tell people? I think it's wonderfully inspiring.
Is that there are two. One of them is that children were raised in boxes, but the other one was when we told the parents that the child needed a little space for her.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah, the children, and we found that the children who had a little space, even if there were 15 people living in a small room, if there was a little corner where the child had blocks, maybe a torn up book, worn out, stuffed bear, it gave them security, and they had a pride, and this is my space, and they also had more child-related activities. So after we saw that, then that was one of the things that we talked with the parents about, but we learned that from the parents. We weren't aware of that. So one of the parents said, this is what I do, and so then she taught the other parents. And sometimes, you can do so many things that don't require money, like paying attention. It doesn't require money. I always, when I work with parents, I say, do you know what the most preferred toy is for children? And they say, Legos, the iPad. I said, no, another human being. That's the preferred toy for children. So
Wonderful. Thank you again, Johanna.
well,
Is
thank you so much for this opportunity and for all your wonderful questions. It got me all excited about this work. So thank you so much.
there- and we take pride in our audiences. So they always ask good questions.
Amazing questions. And Bill, I am happy if, Warren can give you my email. So if you want to talk a little bit more and I can give you some more resources for your friends if that's something you would like.
Thank you very much. That would be great.
Okay. And thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. Thank you.
Just a few quick announcements before we go. The next lecture will be Friday evening, the 25th of March of this year. We had one speaker lined up to talk about some research she had done in Africa. But unfortunately, Africa, the part of Africa where she was doing the research is now a war zone. And it's delayed a lot of her research because of it. Life intervenes. So you're stuck with me, for better or for worse. I thought you might be interested about some of the research I have done on human judgment and decision making, especially in competitions and contests for scarce resources. So I will talk about some of the injustices that are built into the systems that we usually use to give out trophies or awards or research grants or raises or any other competitive outcome. And some of how the injustices get multiplied in these situations and what can be done about it. So if you followed, for example, the Olympics and have noticed that the gold medal and the silver medal usually is a matter of hundredths of a second, and you ask yourself, did the best person really win? You'll find out some of an answer next time we meet. I want to thank again Johanna for a wonderful lecture. I want to thank Mel Turner, Jan Johns, and Glenda Jones for doing more than I do to keep this lecture series going. I want to make a pitch in case you have guilt feelings about not paying for this. You're welcome to reduce that guilt by offering a small donation. And you can do that online at our website, which is Almont Lectures, one word, at also almontlectures.net or almontlectures.com. Most of all, I'd like to thank you folks for attending this, and I hope to see you in future lectures. So let's go home and have a glass of wine. Oh, you are home.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you again. Good
Thank
night for
you.
now.